I'll start my short introduction or presentation by introducing to you this figure from our office. You can see it, our presentations are highlighted over there. I hope maybe not everybody sees that, but it shows a figure how we illustrate our media educational thinking, both in our organization, but we use this to illustrate the media education in Finland in general. First of all, it highlights the key concepts that are involved in the media educational thinking. First of all, the basis for media education and the promotion of media literacy comes from the mediated life. Media has a great influence, meaningful role in our everyday life, but also in a society in a more broader scope. It gives us an opportunity to support our social participation. More and more our communication with other people are mediated through some technological devices, through media content and different softwares. It also gives us a way to understand the world in our own surroundings, but in a world in general. It also gives us a way to express ourselves and to bring up our voices to be heard. Next thing that the figure illustrates is the relationship between the key concepts. First of all, I would like to highlight the relationship between media literacy and media education. We need to have a clear image in our head of the educational goals, what we mean by media literacy, so we can plan the educational activities, the pedagogical activities. And the last thing that this picture highlights is that we don't see the media literacy as a key educational concept, not for its own sake, but because we see it as a key or as a tool for broader goals, broader outcomes, for example, to promote peace or democracy or good life in general. When I was preparing this presentation, I wanted to look how media education was part of the Finnish curricula earlier as well. So I made this kind of small historical contextualization just to give you some background information about the Finnish educational system. The media education in its contents have been in curriculum in Finland for a long time. Here are examples from the basic education. I found that already in the 1950s, there were the first remarks of media education in the Finnish curriculum. Of course, the concept of media education or media literacy was not used, but the contents there were explicated remarks about teaching about media that could be understood to be this kind of media educational contents. But in the 70s, there were more systematic way to understand media education. The terms changed. They were used, this kind of concept of audiovisual education and mass media education to highlight the current media environment that was back then. In the 1980s, the mass media education was still used, but in the 1990s, the communication education, including media education, was first used in the curriculum text. In 2004, the curricula introduced terms communication skills and media literacy. And this, maybe the aspect or the perspective changed from the education to this kind of outcome-based thinking, that it was explicated what the media literacy means. So basically this historical contextualization shows how the evolvement of terminology have changed or have gone. And it always have been, the curriculum, the educational system is not in isolation from outside world, but it's always connected to the current certain societal, cultural, media culture that surrounds it. And of course, the relationship between the research literature and discussion as well. So now, when we are going to the year 2019, we should think about what are those current trends in the media culture that should be taken into account in the educational context as well. I listed here some of the concepts or trends that has been under discussion in the Finnish educational setting and media studies. First of all, it's the basic idea of the mediatization, how the media has a growing role in our everyday life and in the society. And the technological developments, for example, the digitalization, have made it possible that many of those mediums that used to be different, for example, newspapers, television, etc., they are more and more interconnected and even overlapping or merging. For example, those pupils in the picture, they analyze the newspaper, but they still analyze it also from the smartphone. So they use the different mediums to use it for different medium as well. And also, more and more, the communication comes in a different forms. So this multimodality is one topic that has been under discussion. How we use not only plain text, but visual symbols, pictures, animations, videos in our communication. And as Tordi has said, these kind of digital technologies have also transformed what it means to be literate and to experience literacy nowadays. And he has made this article about the taxonomy of different literacies that he explicates to have been, what kind of literacies have been used to capture this kind of technological transformation. For example, the media literacy, information literacy, or digital literacy, and many other literacies, as you may know. But when we go to the current context in the Finnish educational system, I'm really sorry, maybe not all of you can see the figure I wanted to show you, but it illustrates the Finnish educational system. Basically, there is the basic education that starts from the year 9 and lasts for 9 years. It starts at the age 7, the pupils are at age 7 when they enter the basic education, and it lasts for 9 years. But before that, there is the pre-primary education and early childhood education and care. And above that is the upper secondary education. But what is important to notice in the latest curricular reform that was commissioned in 2016, a completely new concept of multiliteracy was introduced in the Finnish curricular framework and in the educational system. Multiliteracy means the competence to interpret, to produce, and make valued judgments across a variety of different texts in different environments, for example, in digital environments as well. But what is important to note that this same concept that is used not only in the basic education, but also in the pre-primary education and also in the early childhood education and care curricula. And also in the upper secondary education, in the general upper secondary education and the vocational education as well. So the same concept goes through the educational system as a whole. But when we focus on the multiliteracy in a Finnish basic education, we see that it's one of these 7 transversal competences that is explicated there. This means that the multiliteracy has a major role since it should be developed in all different subjects, in all different disciplines, and in all grade levels, starting in the basic education, starting from the first grade. Multiliteracy is based on this kind of broad understanding of text. In this context, text means information produced by systems of verbal, visual, auditive, numeric, and kinesthetic symbols and their combinations. Multiliteracy, as it is said in the name, is this kind of umbrella concept that involves different literacies under it. For example, the media literacy. But what is important to notice from the perspective of this kind of broad media educational or diverse media educational perspective is that the developing multiliteracy, its precondition is the cooperation inside the educational system between those different subjects, but also with other actors, for example, libraries, museums, youth work. Last, lastly, I want to highlight 3 points to conclude this first introductory presentation. First is the broadness and diversity of media literacy. This means that from the policymaker's point of view, media literacy is not only a matter in the educational policies, but also there is own media literacy policies, separately, individual, but it's a part of many different policy areas. For example, education, cultural policies, library policies, audiovisual policies, media policy as well. So it's connected to different areas of policies. So this cooperation is really important and highlighted. But the broadness also is seen inside the specific policy area. For example, in the education, it's the transversality that we try to capture the broadness, the different aspects to media literacy. The second point I want to highlight is the curricular consistency. Every educational system, they forms a whole, like different parts forms a whole educational system, so it should be this kind of broad aspect when we are thinking about developing educational systems. For example, in Finland, this means that the same terminology has been used in all of those different curricular levels or different levels of education. But on the other hand, it also highlights the importance of contextualization, that we cannot see that we use the same concept in a different way, in the same way in all of those different contexts, but we need to highlight the importance to, for example, age-specific pedagogical thinking in the early childhood education and basic education pedagogy is there, and educational thinking. So it highlights the need for mutual discussions, what we mean by those same concepts that we use. The last point I want to highlight is the conceptual clarity of the educational goals. This means that when we highlight the broadness and diversity of media literacy, the term comes really broad and diverse. So we cannot take it for granted that when we are talking about the same concept, that we really mean the same things with the same concept. So this means that we need to verbalize what we mean by media literacy when we are talking about it, and to have these kind of mutual discussions to promote the shared understanding. And this all, of course, promotes the equity of media literacy. We see that media literacy in this mediated culture, in society and in the world in general, should be a competence for all. So we need to take into account how we promote the media literacy for all people.